In fact, let's just start with that. Why do you think there's a war in Ukraine happening?
Oh, why we should pull out. Hold on. Can we hit every... I wonder if we can hit all the Russian talking points. Let's see. Hey, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe she'll impress me. Okay, we have Ukrainians are dying, threat of World War III, threat of nuclear war, something, Azov / Nazis / not sure where our weapons are going, need to fund stuff at home, e.g., or like, because we're sending too much money to Ukraine. Something about NATO expansion will be in there. Something of NATO expansion, or we / Ukraine started it. Maybe even something along the lines of like, it was Russia's originally in reference to Crimea. That's like that'll be a bonus one. And then maybe, okay, wait, we'll do 2 bonus ones. We'll do it was Russia's originally, and then we'll do 2014 was a CIA coup because of the Newland phone call. Okay, let's try these. All right, let's see what we got.
Right now.
Well, you look at the triggering...
In fact, let's just start with that. Why do you think there's a war in Ukraine happening right now?
Well, you look at the triggering event of Putin's invasion into Ukraine, but you also have to look at the history of NATO and incursion and the expansion of NATO.
We got NATO expansion.
That played a very real factor in that taking place. In addition to Kamala Harris and others in the Biden administration in the days and weeks leading up to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, basically saying, well, Ukraine needs to be a member of NATO, even though that was not a realistic thing at that given time. And there were many NATO members who were very strongly opposed to that idea. And so
where do you think
the war kicked off?
If there were NATO members opposed to that idea, you wouldn't be able to get into NATO, by the way. It has to be unanimous approval, but...
That makes sense. And look, by the way, I don't think anyone sensible would deny that NATO expansion is a provocation to Russia.
Also, I don't know if Kamala or anybody like guaranteed or said for sure that Ukraine would go to NATO, but whatever.
Yes.
I think this is undeniable to some extent. I suppose the question is, where do you think NATO should have stopped expanding?
That's a good question. I wonder if that's... You know what? For as much as I hate this centrist fucking piece of shit, that's a good question.
Where do you think NATO should have stopped expanding? Because this is...
I wonder if she even knows which countries are in NATO. She might literally have no fucking idea what the answer to this question is. She might be totally fucking lost. Oof, that might be a really rough... She's like, fuck. Britain? She might have no idea.
If
you look back to...
I wonder if she's not going to mention a single specific country on this.
The fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
When I believe...
Oh, she can do the not 1 inch eastward line?
It was... well, Russia said, like, hey, we would like to join NATO. I think that was a pivotal moment where I think it was Bill Clinton who said no at that time. First he said yes, and then he came back and he said no. But when we look at what was the reason to oppose Russia's joining NATO at that time, there was clearly a decision that had to be made. Well, at that point, fall of the Soviet Union, why should NATO still exist? They needed someone to be the bad guy.
All of that is fake bullshit, cocked, stupid. Pretty sure Russia would have been allowed in. They asked for a fast track. They were denied the fast track. Whether or not NATO should have existed was a question that people kind of had, but not really. Also, Europe was still relatively peaceful, and if you're in NATO, you don't get fucked with. It's a nice feeling to have.
And so even though there were overtures at that time or direct requests by Russia to be able to join this North Atlantic Treaty Organization and was rejected, every increment of the expansion at that point was a further statement, I suppose, that, well, NATO needs an enemy and Russia is the enemy.
Okay.
So it's just all of it is bad, I guess, from 91 onwards. Okay.
Here's what I would say. I think that the reason Russia wasn't allowed into NATO is much more the United States' concerns about dominance of NATO. In other words, being in charge. If you have another large country with a huge nuclear arsenal, that upsets the balance. The reason I ask you the question is this. I'm very familiar with the Mearsheimer argument about NATO expansion, etc. Given what I understand Russia's geopolitical ambitions to be, which is to secure its western flank as much as possible, Russia always expands westwards when it can, because we don't need to get into why exactly, economics and geography, etc. So if NATO wasn't incorporating Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania,
Jesus. What? He actually knows some things. I guess maybe he gives a fuck about this issue. I guess because he's from... Okay. He does know a few things. Good job. Oh, man. Tulsi's being asked, like, the most basic questions about this issue, and now she's completely fucking lost. Pretty crazy that she's a politician on the world stage, has conversation about this, and she's, like, has about the average amount of intelligence as, like, a Redditor. Not even, just like a man on the street. Like, you pull a random conservative, like, hey, what do you think about this? And that's, like, her level of insight to it. How insane.
and all these countries that are terrified of Russian westwards expansion, and they have been for historical reasons. They've always been invaded over and over and over. The question to me is, if NATO hadn't expanded or disbanded, which is what some people are advocating, where would Russian tanks be today? Or what part of the world would Russia control? And it seems to me incredibly naive to think that they would have just said, oh, okay, we've split up the Soviet, we'll just leave it as is.
I mean,
what I'm saying?
yeah, I hear you, but I
She's not going to have an answer.
think that it's an impossible hypothesis to prove.
The fact that you say that justifies the existence of NATO, by the way. If somebody were to say, hey, I'm going to install this massive steel door in front of my home, you're like, wait a second, that's a waste of money. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, if I don't have this steel door, do you think that my neighbors are going to invade my house and rape and murder me? And they're like, I don't know if I can really answer that question. Then you go, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put up the door then. Thanks. Like,
One way or the other. I'm sure that historians on both sides of this point could argue and make
no, they wouldn't.
credible arguments about what would have or could
No.
have happened.
No.
My point with what is happening today is that, yes, we have to understand history, but we also have
There is no, why? I hate it when people say, we have to understand history. What history? You don't understand any history. You don't know anything about this. You literally know nothing about European history, Russian history, and you know nothing about any of this. So why are you saying we have to do history? It's like a pivot. It's the aesthetic of, oh, it's like when leftists say, read books. Read what books, motherfucker? You haven't read shit. What are you talking about? You mean read tweets? What have you read lately? Get the fuck out of here.
to look at this current war with a very with a realist view.
Yes.
Oh, the Mearsheimer, realist. You're a realist. Oh, if you want to use a realist view that countries will abuse and do whatever around you that they can, then isn't that a really good reason for why NATO expanded? Wouldn't that be like the perfect... If you want to use a realist argument, wouldn't that perfectly explain why the Baltics are in NATO? Isn't that literally exactly why?
What are Russia's capabilities today? What is the cultural and historical significance of the areas that Russia has tried to take control over or has actually? And what is our continued support of Ukraine in what is essentially a proxy war against Russia? What is the actual objective that they're trying to accomplish here? We've heard from Secretary of Defense Austin and others in the Biden administration saying, well, you know, they want to weaken Russia or weaken Putin, or they want to punish Putin for what he's done, or they want to essentially enact a regime change and get rid of Putin altogether. But they've not talked about, well, what happens next? What happens when you have a country like Russia that has more nuclear weapons than anywhere in the world? When you remove Putin, and who then goes in to replace him?
All of that stuff is terrible.
Just
I agree.
with
Yeah, but like, do you think there shouldn't be a punishment when you invade countries?
you know, what should have happened, and I've said this from the very beginning, is President Biden should have gone in and taken on a leadership role along with members of NATO and others to actually be able to negotiate some kind of workable peace treaty
Like how?
to
What
end that
peace
war
treaty?
as quickly as possible. And I find it unconscionable that not only did that not happen, but that other countries who have come in and actually brought parties together to the table, that the president has stood in the way of that progress. So as we look at every tranche of billions of dollars that is sent to Ukraine, this most recent one, you'll hear that, well, Ukraine will lose unless we give them this money, but we have no idea how long they can hold the line. No one has been able to define, well, what does a quote unquote win look like? At what point? Is this just another war of attrition that the United States and others are going to keep funding until what point? What about the Ukraine? I have friends in Ukraine. I've been there many times. And,
Me too.
and
Ukrainians are dying?
it is the Ukrainian people who are paying the price
There we
for
go.
this.
We got that one.
And
Okay.
generally, sometimes war is necessary. It is always unfortunate. It is always ugly. Unfortunately, sometimes it is necessary. I'm not a pacifist or an isolationist who
We've only got 2
thinks that,
minutes.
doesn't live in a real world. But I truly believe that
Is it really just her waffling for the whole time? We're not going to get to any of the other talking points?
all diplomatic efforts need to be exhausted before we go and pursue the path of war. And if we
They already are in war. What do you mean? There was nothing to exhaust. They were already in war.
pursue the path of war, there has to be very clearly defined objectives and a definition of what we are trying to accomplish. What is a win that is based on reality, not based on some fantasy that will never actually be possible.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything you're saying, actually, in terms of that. And the money that has just been sent is not
Yeah,
going to
because she's not saying anything.
make any difference.
It won't.
We both know that. I guess what I'm saying is the counterfactual conversation is important because I hear far too many people running around shouting about how we should have disbanded NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And the counterfactual is important because if we had done that, I put it to you that Russian tanks or influence in some very corrupt form, in the same
Would
way
be all the way back through Poland. They'd be on the German borders.
that it was already in Germany and elsewhere, would have been far further west than Ukraine, right? So containing Russia, I would say, is a necessary thing. How you do that, we haven't done it very well or very skillfully, and we've made mistakes. But the idea that we could have just, disband NATO or not expand into Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, etc., I think it is not considering the alternative sufficiently.
Here's the problem that I have is that
She would never agree to that. She can't possibly do that with Russian fucking...
you can't even have, nobody can have this conversation.
We're having it now.
And
Got him. We can't even know because the U.S. has been so evil.
in America today. I'm
I
talking
know,
about.
I know,
I'm
I
talking
know.
about between the policymakers
I know.
and between the talking heads on TV. Even an academic discussion about this
Yeah.
it is not permitted. As soon as you bring up, I agree. I think there should be this fact counter fact back and forth argument that needs to be a part of this before glibly saying, well, we're going to enact this policy and that's just the way it's going to be. We have to have this dialogue. The fact that it is not allowed in Washington or in the media today is a major problem.